The Telemundo studios in Miami buzzed with anticipation. Tonight's special broadcast, Voces del Futuro, Voices of the Future, was supposed to showcase unity between American and Latin American youth leaders. The producers had carefully orchestrated what they thought would be a safe, feel-good segment featuring Caroline Levitt and Bad Bunny discussing social issues affecting young people. Caroline sat in the green room, reviewing her notes while adjusting her signature silver cross necklace. She wore a crisp white blazer that contrasted beautifully with her dark hair, projecting professionalism and confidence. Across the hallway, she could hear Bad Bunny's entourage laughing loudly, their voices echoing through the corridor. "Remember," her communications director Emma whispered, "this is supposed to be about finding common ground. Don't let him bait you into anything controversial." Karoline nodded, but something felt off. The invitation had come suddenly, and Bad Bunny's team had specifically requested that the conversation include topics about traditional values versus progressive ideals. That wasn't the kind of discussion that usually led to unity. Bad Bunny entered the studio wearing an oversized designer hoodie, covered in religious imagery that had been twisted into provocative art. Gold chains hung around his neck, and his signature colorful hair was styled perfectly for the cameras. He moved with the confidence of someone who owned every room he entered. "Caroline," he called out in accented English, his arms spread wide in an exaggerated gesture of welcome. "The famous press secretary. I've been wanting to meet the woman who thinks she can speak for all Americans." The cameras weren't rolling yet, but Caroline could sense the setup. This wasn't going to be the respectful dialogue the producers had promised. "It's nice to meet you too," Caroline replied evenly, extending her hand for a professional handshake. "I'm looking forward to our conversation." Bad Bunny took her hand but pulled her closer than necessary, speaking loud enough for the crew to hear. "I hope you're ready to defend your, how do you say, old-fashioned ideas to a new generation." The host, Maria Fernandez, called for places as the cameras prepared to roll. The set was designed to look casual and intimate, with two comfortable chairs facing each other against a backdrop of vibrant Miami artwork. "Welcome to Voces del Futuro," Maria began in Spanish before switching to English. "Tonight we have two influential voices representing different perspectives on the future of American politics and culture." She introduced Bad Bunny first, highlighting his massive social media following and his influence over young Latino voters. Then she turned to Caroline, emphasizing her historic role as the youngest White House press secretary ever. "Let's start with something everyone can relate to," Maria said with a practiced smile. "What role should faith play in public life?" Caroline straightened in her chair. "I believe faith provides a moral foundation that helps guide decision-making. It's not about imposing beliefs on others, but about having principles that don't change based on polls or popularity." Bad Bunny laughed, a sound that carried just enough mockery to be insulting without being overtly rude. "Principles that don't change? That sounds like code for being stuck in the past." He leaned forward, his gold chains catching the studio lights. "You wear that little cross like it's some kind of shield, but what has your faith actually done for the people suffering in Puerto Rico? In Colombia? In Mexico?" The question was loaded, designed to make Caroline look either defensive or out of touch. But she had been preparing for this moment longer than Bad Bunny realized. "That's an interesting question," Caroline replied, her voice calm but with an edge that made the crew lean in closer, especially coming from someone who claims to care about those same communities. She reached into her blazer and pulled out a slim folder that she placed carefully on her lap. "Since you brought up Puerto Rico, maybe we should talk about where your charity money actually goes." Bad Bunny's confident smirk flickered for just a moment. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the Corazon Latino Foundation that you promote so heavily on social media," Caroline said, opening the folder slightly. "The one that's supposed to help hurricane victims and struggling families." The studio had gone quiet except for the hum of cameras. Maria looked confused, clearly not expecting the conversation to take this turn. "According to IRS filings," Caroline continued, "your foundation has raised over $50 million in the past 3 years, but less than 12% of that money has actually reached the communities you claim to help." Bad Bunny's face had changed completely. The playful arrogance was gone, replaced by something much more dangerous. "Where did the rest go?" Karoline asked, her eyes never leaving his face. The tension in the studio was thick enough to cut with a knife. Bad Bunny's usual swagger had evaporated, replaced by the look of a cornered animal. His manager, who had been casually scrolling through his phone in the back of the studio, was now standing at attention, his face pale with concern. "You don't know what you're talking about," Bad Bunny said, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "My foundation helps thousands of people." Karoline opened her folder completely, revealing several documents with official letterheads and financial charts. "Actually, I know exactly what I'm talking about. I spent the last week reviewing public records, tax filings, and bank statements." She pulled out the first document and held it up for the cameras. "This is a wire transfer record showing $15 million moving from your foundation's account to a shell company in the Cayman Islands, the same shell company that owns 3 luxury properties in your name." Maria tried to regain control of the interview. "Perhaps we should move to a different topic." "No," Caroline interrupted firmly but politely. "He questioned my faith and my commitment to helping people. I think the audience deserves to know who's really helping and who's just performing for social media." Bad Bunny leaned back in his chair, his gold chain shifting as he crossed his arms defensively. "Even if that were true, which it's not, at least I'm not trying to force my religion on everyone else." "Religion?" Caroline's eyebrows rose slightly. "Is that what you call basic honesty and accountability?" She pulled out another document. "This is an email from your own accountant expressing concern about irregular financial practices and potential legal exposure. He specifically mentions payments to political campaigns that weren't properly disclosed." The camera operator zoomed in on Bad Bunny's face, capturing the moment his confident mask completely slipped. Sweat was beginning to form on his forehead despite the studio's air conditioning. "You want to mock my faith?" Karoline continued, her voice steady but gaining intensity. "My faith teaches me that stealing from the poor is one of the worst sins imaginable. What does your conscience tell you about taking money meant for hurricane victims and buying yourself a $12 million mansion in Los Angeles?" The studio erupted in whispered conversations as crew members realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. This wasn't a political debate anymore. It was an exposure. Bad Bunny's manager was now frantically making phone calls in the corner, clearly trying to do damage control, but it was too late. The interview was being broadcast live across Latin America, and social media was already exploding with clips and reactions. "Those are private financial matters," Bad Bunny finally managed to say, his earlier cockiness completely gone. "You have no right to—" "I have every right," Caroline cut him off. "When you use your platform to influence millions of young people, when you ask them to donate their hard-earned money to help their communities, you become accountable to them." She stood up from her chair, still holding the documents. "And when you mock someone's faith while secretly betraying the trust of the very people you claim to represent, that makes you a hypocrite of the highest order." Bad Bunny looked around desperately, as if searching for an escape route. His entourage, which had been so loud and confident earlier, was now huddled together in worried conversation. "But here's what really bothers me," Caroline said, pulling out one final document that made Bad Bunny's face go completely white. "It's not just about the money you stole from charity, it's about where some of that money went." She held up a bank statement with several highlighted transactions. "These payments to Servicios Consultoría Medellín. Do you want to tell the audience what that company really does?" Bad Bunny's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. He knew exactly what that company was, and he knew that Caroline had just connected him to something far more serious than charity fraud. "Or should I explain it to them myself?" Caroline asked, her silver cross catching the studio lights as she prepared to deliver the knockout blow. The silence in the studio was deafening. Even the camera operators had stopped moving, afraid to miss a single moment of what was unfolding. Caroline stood with the bank statement in her hand, looking directly into the main camera, as if speaking to every viewer across Latin America. "Servicios Consultoría Medellín," she read aloud, "is a front company for the Medellín cartel's money laundering operations. According to DEA intelligence reports, they've been used to clean drug money through fake consulting contracts for over 5 years." Bad Bunny shot up from his chair so fast that he knocked over his water bottle, sending liquid cascading across the studio floor. You can't say that on television. That's defamation. Is it? Karoline asked calmly, pulling out another document. Because this is a copy of a federal investigation report that lists your foundation as a person of interest in a money laundering probe. You've been under surveillance for 8 months. The color drained completely from Bad Bunny's face. His manager was now shouting into his phone in rapid Spanish, clearly trying to reach lawyers or publicists who could somehow contain this disaster. Maria, the host, looked like she was about to faint. This was supposed to be a light cultural exchange program, not an exposé that could bring down one of Latin music's biggest stars. The payments to Medellin, Karoline continued, weren't just money laundering. They were payment for protection services. Your concerts in Colombia, Mexico, and Venezuela, the ones where you made millions in cash sales, required cartel approval and security. She flipped to another page. In exchange, you agreed to use your foundation to clean their money and your social media influence to promote certain political candidates who would be friendly to their business interests. Bad Bunny was now pacing behind his chair like a caged animal. This is insane. You're making this up. Am I? Karoline asked. She pulled out her phone and held it up. Because I have audio recordings of your conversations with cartel representatives. Would you like me to play them? The threat hung in the air like a sword. Bad Bunny stopped pacing and stared at her, his breathing heavy and visible even on camera. You want to know what my faith teaches me? Karoline said, her voice rising for the first time. It teaches me that when you see evil, you don't stay silent. When you see people being hurt, you speak up. When you see someone using their influence to help criminals while pretending to help victims, you expose them. She turned back to Bad Bunny, who was now slumped in his chair, his head in his hands. You mocked my cross, called my beliefs outdated. But at least my beliefs don't require me to take blood money from drug dealers. The studio erupted as Bad Bunny's entourage started arguing among themselves. Some were trying to leave, others were demanding that the cameras stop rolling. But the broadcast was live, and there was no way to take back what had already been said. The young people who look up to you, Karoline continued, the ones who bought your music and donated to your fake charity, they deserved better than this. They deserved someone who actually cared about their communities instead of someone who was helping to destroy them. Bad Bunny finally looked up, his eyes red with either rage or tears. You don't understand the pressure, the threats. You don't know what it's like to what? Karoline interrupted. To choose between doing the right thing and making money? To choose between protecting your fans and protecting yourself? She walked closer to him, still holding the documents. I'm 27 years old. I'm the youngest White House press secretary in history. Every day I face pressure from people who want me to compromise my values, to go along with corruption, to stay quiet about things that matter. Her voice softened slightly but remained firm. The difference between us is that my faith gives me the strength to say no. Your greed made you say yes. Security guards were now entering the studio as Bad Bunny's team realized that this situation was spiraling completely out of control, but it was too late. The damage was done, and the evidence was public. There's one more thing, Karoline said, pulling out a final document that made everyone in the room freeze. The FBI raid on your Miami mansion is scheduled for tomorrow morning, but since we're live on television, I guess they might want to move that up. The words FBI raid had barely left Karoline's lips when the studio doors burst open. Federal agents in tactical gear flooded into the room, their weapons drawn but pointed downward. The lead agent, a stern woman with FBI emblazoned across her vest, approached the set with practiced efficiency. Benito Antonio Martinez Ocasio, she called out, using Bad Bunny's real name. You are under arrest for money laundering, conspiracy to commit fraud, and providing material support to criminal organizations. Bad Bunny's legs gave out completely. He collapsed back into his chair, his face a mask of disbelief and terror. The gold chains around his neck suddenly looked less like jewelry and more like shackles. This can't be happening, he whispered, but the handcuffs clicking around his wrists made it very real. The studio had descended into chaos. Camera operators were still filming, unsure whether to stop or keep rolling. Bad Bunny's entourage was scattering like roaches when the lights come on, some trying to delete things from their phones, others attempting to slip out through emergency exits only to find more FBI agents waiting. Agent Sarah Chen, Financial Crimes Division, the lead agent announced to the cameras, clearly understanding that this arrest was being broadcast live across the Americas. This investigation, codenamed Operation Reggaeton, has been ongoing for 14 months. Karoline remained standing calmly in the center of the chaos, still holding her folder of documents. She had known this moment was coming, but seeing it unfold live on television was surreal even for her. The evidence provided by the White House Press Secretary's office, Agent Chen continued, was the final piece we needed to move forward with arrests and asset seizures. Bad Bunny looked up at Karoline with a mixture of hatred and broken pride. You planned this whole thing. The interview, the questions, everything. Karoline met his gaze without flinching. I planned to tell the truth. You planned to keep lying to millions of people while stealing their money and helping drug dealers destroy their communities. As the agents prepared to escort Bad Bunny out of the studio, his manager made one last desperate attempt at damage control. This is all a misunderstanding. My client is innocent until proven guilty. Agent Chen turned to address the cameras directly. The evidence includes over $50 million in fraudulent charity transactions, recorded conversations with cartel representatives, and financial records showing systematic money laundering through multiple shell companies. She held up a thick folder of her own. We've also identified at least 12 other celebrities and influencers who were part of this network. Arrests will continue throughout the week. Bad Bunny was now being led away in handcuffs, his designer hoodie a stark contrast to the federal custody situation he found himself in. As he passed Karoline, he stopped and looked at her one more time. You have no idea what you've started, he said quietly. These people don't forgive. They don't forget. Karoline's response was calm but firm. Neither do the families of the people killed by the cartels you've been helping. Neither do the hurricane victims whose donations you stole. As Bad Bunny disappeared through the studio doors, surrounded by federal agents, the magnitude of what had just happened began to sink in. One of Latin music's biggest stars had just been arrested live on television, exposed by a 27-year-old press secretary who had simply done her homework. Maria, the host, finally found her voice. We need to go to commercial, but Karoline stepped forward. Actually, I think the audience deserves to know the rest of the story. She opened her folder one more time, revealing documents that would make the Bad Bunny arrest look like just the beginning. Because he wasn't working alone, and the network we've uncovered reaches much higher than anyone imagined. 6 months later, Karoline stood in the Rose Garden of the White House, addressing a crowd of reporters and law enforcement officials. The investigation that had started with Bad Bunny's arrest had grown into the largest entertainment industry corruption probe in history. Operation Reggaeton has resulted in 47 arrests across 6 countries, she announced, reading from prepared remarks. We've recovered over $300 million in stolen charity funds and dismantled a money laundering network that was processing nearly $2 billion annually for various criminal organizations. The list of arrested celebrities read like a who's who of Latin entertainment. Reggaeton stars, pop singers, actors, even several prominent social media influencers. All had been using fake charities and shell companies to clean cartel money while building their public images as socially conscious artists. The most important outcome, Karoline continued, is that the recovered funds are now being used for their intended purpose. We've built 127 new schools, provided clean water to 89 communities, and established legitimate healthcare programs across Latin America. A reporter from Univision raised her hand. Ms. Levitt, critics say you targeted Latino artists unfairly. How do you respond to accusations of racial profiling? Karoline's expression remained calm but firm. Corruption has no race, no nationality, and no genre of music. We followed the money, not demographics. The investigation included artists of all backgrounds who were participating in these criminal networks. What she didn't mention publicly was the personal cost of her actions. Since that night at the Telemundo studios, Karoline had been living under federal protection. The cartels had put a price on her head, and several attempts had been made to intimidate or harm her family. but the results spoke for themselves. Bad Bunny was now serving a 25-year sentence in federal prison. His mansion, cars, and jewelry had been seized and sold, with the proceeds going to legitimate charities. His music had been removed from most streaming platforms, and his record label had collapsed under the weight of the scandal. "There's something else I want to address," Karoline said, her voice taking on a more personal tone. "That night, Bad Bunny mocked my faith. He called my beliefs outdated and irrelevant." She paused, touching her silver cross necklace. "But it was precisely because of my faith that I couldn't stay silent when I saw people being hurt. My beliefs didn't make me weak or naive. They gave me the strength to stand up to corruption, even when it was dangerous." The crowd of reporters leaned in, sensing that this was more than just a policy statement. "Faith without action is meaningless," Karoline continued, "but action without moral foundation is just politics." What happened that night wasn't about religion versus secularism. It was about right versus wrong. A young reporter from a Puerto Rican newspaper stood up. "Ms. Levitt, many young Latinos looked up to Bad Bunny as a voice for their community. How do you think this affects their trust in public figures?" Karoline's expression softened. "I hope it teaches them to look beyond the image and examine the actions. Real leadership isn't about having the most followers or the catchiest songs. It's about using your influence to actually help people, not exploit them." She pulled out one final document, a letter written in Spanish by a young girl from Puerto Rico whose school had been built with the recovered charity funds. "This letter is from Isabella, age 12, from Bayamon," Karoline read, translating as she went. She writes, "Thank you for making sure our school got built. Bad Bunny promised us a library, but you gave us a whole education. My faith in God is stronger because I saw that good people still fight for what's right." Karoline folded the letter carefully. "That's why we do this work. Not for headlines or political points, but for Isabella and thousands of children like her who deserve leaders who actually keep their promises." As the press conference ended, Karoline reflected on how much had changed since that confrontational night in Miami. Bad Bunny's empire had crumbled, but something more important had been built in its place: accountability. The entertainment industry had been forced to confront its role in money laundering and corruption. New regulations required transparency in celebrity charitable foundations, and young people across Latin America had learned that their heroes should be judged by their actions, not their social media presence. Most importantly, the investigation had sent a clear message to criminal organizations. Using celebrities and fake charities to clean drug money would no longer be tolerated, regardless of how famous or influential the perpetrators might be. Karoline walked back toward the White House, her silver cross catching the afternoon sunlight. She had been mocked for her faith, threatened for her courage, and criticized for her methods. But she had also helped recover hundreds of millions of dollars for people who desperately needed it. As she often told young people who asked for advice, "Don't let anyone tell you that having principles makes you weak. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is simply tell the truth." The man who had once sung, "I do what I want," was now learning that actions have consequences, and the young woman who wore her faith proudly had proven that sometimes the most powerful weapon against corruption isn't a gun or a badge. It's the courage to speak truth to power, no matter how famous or dangerous that power might be.